He accepted $1 million for one night. But the billionaire wanted his heart forever, and this happened. What would you do for $1 million? For many, that amount could solve every problem, a one-way ticket to a brand new life. But what if that money came with something else, something unexpected, uncontrollable, and dangerous? Liam Carter never imagined an offer like this would land at his feet. One night, just one. In return, an amount that could change his life forever. The man behind the offer? Dominic Hawthorne, a billionaire, powerful, enigmatic, and used to getting exactly what he wants. But that night, when Liam accepted, he had no idea he was giving away more than just his time. He was opening a door he could never close again. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us continue bringing you intense and irresistible stories. Now, get ready, because this story is about to begin. New York never sleeps. The city buzzed with life even in the late hours of the night as neon signs reflected off the rain-slicked streets. Cars honked, people rushed from one place to another, but inside the quiet luxury of the Empire penthouse, the world felt entirely different. Isolated, intimate. I stood in front of the black and gold door, my heart hammering against my ribs. In my hand was the keycard Dominic Hawthorne had given me earlier that night, along with an offer that still made my pulse race. $1 million for a single night. A number so high, so ridiculous that it should have been impossible to say no. But this wasn't just about the money. I wasn't naive. I knew who Dominic was. A billionaire, a man of influence. The kind of person who never asked, only declared. The type of man who could buy anything. And tonight, he had chosen to spend that money on me. Why? I had no idea. When I met him earlier that night at an upscale restaurant, a place I could never afford to be on my own, he had looked at me as if I were already his. The conversation had been brief, to the point, and spoken in that deep, commanding voice that sent shivers down my spine. One night with me, Liam. No questions, no strings. $1 million. His confidence was almost unnerving, but what unsettled me more was how much I wanted to say yes. And so, I did. And now, here I was, standing in front of his penthouse, my hands slick with sweat as I slid the keycard into the reader. The door clicked open, revealing another world entirely. The suite was breathtaking, marble floors, towering windows overlooking the city skyline, dim lighting casting everything in a golden hue. A bottle of whiskey sat on a sleek black table, 2 glasses already poured. And there he was. Dominic Hawthorne, standing by the window looking out over the city as if he owned it. And, in a way, he did. He turned slowly, and the moment his eyes met mine, my stomach tightened. You came. His voice was smooth, deep, filled with something that made the air feel heavier between us. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. Would have been stupid not to. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips as he took a step closer, his perfectly tailored black suit fitting his broad frame like a second skin. You're nervous. Should I be? I shot back, ignoring the way my pulse quickened as he closed the distance between us. His hand reached out, brushing over the lapel of my jacket. A simple touch, but it burned. That depends on what you expect from tonight. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words caught in my throat. The truth was, I didn't know what I expected. I knew what should happen. The exchange was clear, a night together, nothing more. But when I looked into his piercing blue eyes, something about this felt different, dangerous. You think this is just about money, don't you? He murmured, his voice like silk against my skin. I forced a smirk, though my heart pounded against my ribs. "Isn't it?" His gaze darkened, something unreadable flashing behind his expression. Then, without warning, he leaned in, his lips so close to my ear that I felt his breath. "Tonight will change everything, Liam." Before I could respond, his hand slid down my arm, slow, deliberate. I felt my resolve weaken under his touch, the intensity between us crackling like electricity. I should have stepped back. I should have reminded myself that this was just a transaction, just one night. But when his fingers brushed my jaw and tilted my face up to his, I knew this was already beyond my control. The air between us was thick with tension, the kind that sent my pulse racing and made every inch of my skin hyper-aware of his presence. Dominic stood so close that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, his cologne, dark, expensive, intoxicating, filling my senses. I had expected this night to be purely physical, a transaction between two people who understood the terms. But standing here, with his fingers grazing my jaw, his piercing blue eyes studying me like I was something he wanted to own, I realized how wrong I was. Dominic Hawthorne didn't just buy things, he possessed them. "You think this is just about money, don't you?" His voice was low, his breath warm against my skin. A flicker of something dangerous danced behind his gaze, something that sent a shiver down my spine. Not of fear, but of anticipation. I forced a smirk, trying to regain some control. "Isn't it?" Dominic's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile, it was a warning. "Tell me, Liam," he murmured, his fingers trailing down the side of my neck, making my breath hitch. "If this were just about money, why are you still standing here?" I should have had an answer. I should have walked away, taken the money, and left. But I didn't move, because he was right. It wasn't just about the money. I didn't want to admit it, but something about him pulled me in, something that had nothing to do with wealth or power. It was the way he carried himself, like the world bent to his will, like he already knew how this night would end, and I was just catching up. "You're hesitating," he observed, his fingers brushing the hollow of my throat before he pulled away entirely, as if giving me one last chance to leave. "Tell me now, Liam, are you staying?" I swallowed hard. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Yes." For the first time, his expression shifted. It wasn't victory. It was something deeper, darker, something unreadable. Dominic picked up the glass of whiskey from the table and handed it to me. "Drink." I took it, the glass cold against my fingers, and brought it to my lips. The alcohol burned as it went down, but I didn't cough, didn't flinch. I just met his gaze, unblinking. He liked that. I could see it in the way his jaw tensed, in the way his eyes darkened just a little more. "You're different," he said, almost to himself, watching me like I was a puzzle he intended to solve. I set the glass down and forced a smirk. "You say that to everyone you pay $1 million for?" Dominic let out a low chuckle. But there was something behind it, a hunger that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with control. "I don't pay for people, Liam." His voice was quiet, but firm. "I choose them." My breath caught. This wasn't just a game to him. I wasn't just some temporary distraction. He had seen me, picked me, and now that I was here, I realized I had walked into something far more complicated than I had anticipated. The realization should have made me run. Instead, it made my stomach twist with something that felt dangerously close to excitement. Dominic took a step closer, his fingertips skimming the waistband of my jacket before gripping it lightly, pulling me toward him. "One night. That's what I promised you, isn't it?" "Yes," I murmured, though the word barely made it past my lips. He studied me for a long moment, and then, with a deliberate slowness that made my entire body tense, He leaned in, his lips hovering just a breath away from mine. I thought he was going to kiss me, but he didn't. Instead, he whispered, "Then let's begin." The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter, more dangerous, and I knew, deep down, that this was a mistake, but it was one I was about to make anyway. The moment his words left his lips, I felt the shift. The game had truly begun. Dominic didn't move immediately. Instead, he held me there, close enough that I could feel his breath on my skin, the scent of his cologne wrapping around me like an invisible chain. The anticipation was suffocating, my body tense as I waited for him to take control, to claim what he had paid for. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped back, slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving mine. "Take off your jacket," he instructed, his voice low, commanding. I hesitated, but not out of fear, out of the thrill of what was happening. My fingers found the lapels of my blazer, and as I slid it off my shoulders, I felt the weight of his gaze on me. Dominic took the glass of whiskey from my hand, setting it on the marble bar behind him. "Good," he murmured, his approval sending an unexpected jolt through my chest. I had thought this would be fast, a transaction carried out with efficiency, but Dominic was drawing it out, testing me, savoring the power he held. He circled me slowly, like a predator assessing his prey, his fingers ghosting over the curve of my shoulder, the line of my spine. Every touch was light, fleeting, just enough to set me on fire. "You don't scare easily," he observed, his tone filled with something almost like amusement. I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze over my shoulder. Should I be scared? A slow, knowing smirk crossed his lips. "Not yet." His hand trailed lower, grazing the hem of my shirt, but before he could push further, the sound of a phone buzzing shattered the moment. Dominic's entire demeanor shifted. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened, not with desire, but with annoyance. He turned away, pulling his phone from his pocket, and I watched as his entire body tensed at whatever was on the screen. Something was wrong. I shouldn't have cared. This wasn't my problem. But watching him now, his fingers tightening around the glass of whiskey, his expression unreadable, I knew that whatever had just happened was more important than this night. For the first time, I wondered if I had walked into something far more dangerous than I realized. Dominic exhaled sharply, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. His posture remained controlled, but I could sense the storm brewing beneath the surface. I waited, expecting him to brush it off and return his attention to me, but he didn't. Instead, he drained the rest of his drink in a single motion, then set the glass down with just enough force to make it clear that something had shifted. "I have to take care of something," he said, his voice still composed but lacking the playfulness it held before. I frowned. "Right now?" He looked at me, really looked at me, as if debating whether or not to explain. Then, just as quickly, he decided against it. "Stay here," he said simply. "I won't be long." And then he was gone. The door shut behind him, leaving me alone in his world, in his space, with nothing but the sound of the city humming below. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My pulse was still erratic, my skin still warm from his touch, but my mind was suddenly racing with a different kind of tension. What the hell just happened? I walked toward the bar, grabbing my glass and taking another sip. The whiskey burned on the way down, grounding me, but it didn't erase the feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. Dominic Hawthorne was more than just a billionaire who liked to play games, and whatever had pulled him away tonight, I had a feeling it wasn't just business. For the first time since stepping into this penthouse, I wondered if the money was worth it. Because I had the sinking suspicion that this night wasn't going to end the way I expected. The silence in the penthouse felt heavier now. The space that once seemed intoxicating and luxurious now felt empty. I paced near the floor-to-ceiling windows, my fingers tightening around the glass of whiskey as I stared out over the city skyline. Dominic had left in a hurry, his perfect composure cracking the moment that phone call came through. It wasn't just business. I could feel it. And I should have ignored it. I should have just waited like he told me to, let the $1 million be my only concern. But something in my gut told me that this night was about to take a turn I wasn't prepared for. I set my drink down and looked around the penthouse. Every inch of it was impeccable, too perfect, like the man himself. There were no personal touches, no family photos, no hints of a life beyond wealth and power, except for one thing. Near the bar, on the sleek black counter, a small leather notebook sat beside a pen. Something about it seemed out of place, too simple in a room that reeked of excess. I knew I shouldn't, but my curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, my fingers grazing the fine leather, and flipped it open. The first few pages were filled with names, locations, dates, transactions. Each one neatly listed with initials beside them. I skimmed down, my stomach tightening when I reached one that stood out. L. Carter, one night, $1,000. A chill ran down my spine. My name. Written so detachedly, as if I were nothing more than another entry in a long list of conquests. I clenched my jaw. Why the hell did I feel a pang of disappointment? I knew what this was, a deal, a temporary arrangement, but seeing it in ink, in his own writing, made it feel colder. I turned another page, and then another, and that's when I saw it. A name repeated, not just once, but multiple times. A. Laurent. Unlike the others, this name had dates next to it spanning over months, even years. The last entry? 6 months ago. Something about it made my stomach turn. Before I could think about it too much, the sound of the penthouse door unlocking sent a jolt of panic through me. Shit. I shoved the notebook back into place and took a step back just as Dominic walked in. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different in his eyes, something darker than before. He shrugged off his suit jacket and loosened his tie, but his movements were too controlled, like a man trying to keep something buried. "You're still here," he observed, his voice lower, rougher. I crossed my arms. "You told me to stay, didn't you?" A slow, humorless smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. He poured himself another drink and downed it in one go before setting the glass down with just a little too much force. I studied him carefully. "Bad night?" For a moment, I thought he was going to ignore the question, but then he let out a slow exhale, running a hand through his dark hair. "Let's just say," he murmured, "some things refuse to stay buried." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. I should have left it alone, let the conversation die there. But I couldn't stop myself. "Who's A. Laurent?" His entire body stiffened. I caught the flicker of something in his expression. Surprise, then something sharper. His blue eyes darkened, and when he turned to face me fully, the air between us changed. "Careful, Liam," he said smoothly, but there was a warning beneath his tone. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing. I swallowed hard, but I didn't back down. Is that why they're not on the list anymore? Dominic's jaw tensed, and for the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely unsettled. A slow smirk tugged at his lips, but it didn't hold the same confidence as before. "I see you've been entertaining yourself in my absence." He took a step closer, then another, until I had no choice but to either hold my ground or step back. I didn't move. "You want to know about A. Laurent?" he murmured, his voice low, dangerous. "Fine. They were someone I cared about. I wasn't expecting that. A flicker of something raw passed through his expression before he shut it down completely. I waited for him to continue, but instead he reached out, his fingers grazing my jaw, tilting my face up toward his. "But I don't talk about the past," he whispered. "I focus on the present." And then he kissed me, hard, possessive, like he needed to erase every thought from my mind except him. And for a moment, it worked. But as his hands gripped my waist, as his body pressed against mine, one thought refused to leave me. Whoever A. Laurent was, they had mattered to him. And now, they were gone. Dominic's kiss was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Rough, commanding, filled with something more than just desire. It felt like he was claiming me, like he was demanding my submission, my surrender. And for a brief moment, I almost let him have it. But then I remembered the name. A. Laurent. The way his entire body had tensed at the mention of it, the way his usually unreadable face had cracked for just a second before he buried whatever emotion had flickered there. This wasn't just about a former lover. This was something deeper, darker. Dominic pulled back, his breath warm against my lips, his hand still gripping my waist as if daring me to pull away. His eyes burned into mine, searching for something, a reaction, a weakness, maybe even permission to keep going. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding for a reason that had nothing to do with attraction. "I should go," I whispered. His grip on me tightened. "Why?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like a challenge. I hesitated. I had a million reasons to leave. I should have just taken the money, walked out that door, and never looked back. But something told me that Dominic wasn't the type of man you just walked away from. And for some reason, the idea of being another name on that list, another A. Laurent, sent a chill down my spine. "Because I think I made a mistake," I said carefully, watching his expression for any sign of emotion. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He took a slow breath, like he was calming himself down, and then he released me. "That's disappointing," he murmured, stepping back. His face was blank again, cold, unreadable. But his eyes? They were far from empty. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker there. Frustration, possession, maybe even fear. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. I turned toward the door, my hand slightly shaking as I reached for the handle. But before I could open it, his voice stopped me. "Liam." I froze. "Do you really think I let people go that easily?" A shiver ran down my spine. Slowly I turned back around to face him. He was standing near the bar, pouring himself another drink, too calm, too composed. But the meaning behind his words was loud enough to drown out the silence between us. I narrowed my eyes. "Are you saying I don't have a choice?" He took a sip of his whiskey, his expression unreadable. "I'm saying that you walked into my world, Liam. And once you do that..." He set his glass down, his gaze locking onto mine. "You don't just walk out." My throat went dry. This wasn't about the money anymore. This was about Dominic, his control, his obsession. And the terrifying part? I wasn't sure if I wanted to run or if I wanted to stay. The air between us was thick, suffocating, charged with something far more dangerous than desire. My fingers hovered over the door handle, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Dominic's words echoed in my mind. "You don't just walk out." I should have left anyway. I should have turned the handle, stepped out, disappeared into the city, taken the damn $1 million and never looked back. But I didn't move, because deep down, I already knew the truth. He wouldn't let me go. I forced a breath, my hands balling into fists as I turned back to face him. He stood exactly where I left him, by the bar, watching me with the same intensity as before, like he was waiting for me to make a mistake. Or maybe I already had. "You can't keep me here," I said, keeping my voice steady. Dominic chuckled softly, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "I never said I would." "But you just—" He cut me off with a look. "I said people don't walk away from me easily. That's not the same thing as keeping you prisoner, Liam." His voice was calm, but there was something unsettlingly amused in the way he said my name. "Then let me leave," I challenged. He raised an eyebrow, as if testing me. "Go ahead." I hesitated. It was a trick. I knew it was. Still, I reached for the door handle again, half expecting it to be locked, to feel his hands grab me, pull me back. But it wasn't. The door opened effortlessly. The hallway beyond it was empty, quiet, a golden glow from the chandeliers illuminating the pristine floors. Dominic stayed where he was, letting me decide. My throat was dry as I stepped over the threshold. I was leaving. I was walking away. So why did I feel like I had already lost? I took another step, then another, then... "Liam." I stopped. His voice wasn't demanding this time. It was softer, dangerous in a different way. I exhaled slowly, not turning around. "What?" A pause. Then, "If you walk out that door, you'll never know why I really chose you." My breath caught. I knew I should have kept walking. I knew I should have ignored him, ignored the way his words slithered under my skin, wrapped around my throat like a silk noose. But I didn't. Because curiosity was the one thing more dangerous than him. My fingers clenched at my sides. "Why me, then?" Another pause, and then he laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, but in a way that told me he already knew I wasn't going anywhere. Slowly, I turned back around. And there he was, standing closer than before, glass still in his hand, but eyes locked onto mine like he had already won. "Come back inside," he murmured. "And I'll tell you." I swallowed hard. The hallway was still right there. The exit. The escape. But Dominic Hawthorne was a man who didn't just own people. He owned their choices. And maybe I had never really had one. I stepped back inside. The door clicked shut behind me. And just like that, I belonged to him. The city outside kept moving, but inside this penthouse, my world had just stopped. Dominic smirked, knowing exactly what he had done. I had chosen to stay. Or maybe he had made the choice for me long before tonight. I should have walked away. But the moment the door clicked shut, I knew. I was already his.